give it a minute, allow folks to trickle in. Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ever Federal Government Industry Day. We are excited to kick off the day with alumna Emma Oppenheim, who's going to talk a little bit more just about her experience in federal government hiring and navigating the application process and resume writing. So with that, I will hand it over to Emma.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Just give me 1 second and I'm gonna share my screen. And I'm gonna go to, can everybody see this? Is it looking okay? All right, perfect. So yes, welcome to Federal Government Industry Day. I'm happy to kick things off and talk to you a little bit about the practical side of applying to a federal job. And so I'll just start off by talking a little bit about me and how I ended up at the federal government. And if it's not obvious, I'm actually no longer at the federal government. Really, oh, you can't see this. Reppin Connect for Health Colorado today, which is a state-based exchange. So I can talk more about that if folks are interested. But just a little bit more about me. So I graduated from undergrad in 2012. I did apply to some federal jobs and I never heard back. So what I ended up doing was working as a contractor for 2 years, went to Hopkins, got my MSPH in health policy. I attended a session on how to use USA Jobs when I was in school, and it was extremely helpful. It really helped me apply to jobs appropriately. And then I worked for CMS, so for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services at CMMI for 4 years. And I'm very happy to talk about that experience if people are interested. And then basically after that, I ended up at Connect for Health Colorado, which again, it's a state-based exchange. We're one of those Obamacare health exchanges in the great state of Colorado. So that's been really fun too. And yes, again, I'm happy to talk more about that. So let's see if we can make this a little interactive. I know online is tricky, but who here has ever been to USA Jobs? Like, raise your hand or say yes somehow. All right. I'm seeing.
I have.
A good
number. I don't know how to
of
raise my hand.
of hand raises. Okay, that's great. What about, wait, I'm gonna see if I can do this in a different way. Okay, perfect. What about who has ever, sorry, I'm trying to figure out. Okay, who has ever filled out a federal resume and actually applied to a job with USA Jobs? Raise your hand again. All right, seeing some more hand raises, awesome. Who here, this is the hardest one, who here has ever actually been referred to the hiring manager after applying to a federal job? Not seeing as many hand raises. Yeah, that's the hardest part. So we will definitely talk all about that today. And actually, one more question for everybody. What agencies are you interested in working at? Feel free to I don't know if you can come off mute, but feel free to just type it into chat, or I think maybe just type it into chat. Where do people want to end up? All right, let's see. FDA, yeah, they seem kind of important recently. CDC, hell yeah, we need more of those people. EPA, ooh, very cool, very awesome. CMS, yes, those are my people. NIH, great. So just a little bit of, so I think you know this about me. I worked at CMS. My experience is probably, I feel like I know CMS the best. So absolutely, I always recommend that you find an alumni who works at one of the other agencies within HHS or wherever you want to go. VA is also really cool. There's so many other places, and try to talk to them specifically about the hiring experience. But again, we can talk more about that at the end. It's really exciting to see all these future federal employees across different agencies. All right, let's keep going. So if you want to drop right now, the 3 takeaways I want you to leave with from today's session are essentially that the first one is that your federal resume should be very, very lengthy and detailed. That's going to be our number 1 takeaway. The second takeaway is that you have to add keywords from the job posting into your federal resume. And then the third takeaway, which we'll definitely talk more about, is that you are the most qualified candidate. I want you to remember that, and we're going to talk more about that later. So I hope nobody leaves, but if you want to leave, these are the three things that we're going to learn today. So building your federal resume. And so essentially, what I recommend here is that you forget everything you've ever been told about resumes. Have you forgotten everything? And then are you sure? And so the reason that I say this is that to get a federal job, your resume needs to be very, very lengthy and detailed. So no one pagers, no two pagers. We're talking like a paragraph on everything you've ever done. And so actually, I'm going to take one step back and say that when you log into usajobs.com or .gov, I think, then, and actually I recommend potentially pulling it up right now on your computer and looking through it while we have this conversation. But there is a build a resume function. And so you have to use that build a resume function to build your resume. You should not be just attaching a resume. I think that's a number one mistake that a lot of people make. And so in this build a resume section, you need to have lots and lots of very detailed information on all of your education and all of your work experience. And so just a little bit more about this. So essentially, the goal is to have your resume picked up by computers. And because what happens when you submit your job posting is that they like basically do a scan with computers of federal resumes to identify the folks they think are most qualified. And so they're looking for keywords. And so what that means is that the more words you have in that resume, the more likely it is to be picked up by the computers. And then the second piece that happens before you go to a manager that actually would be hiring you is that your resume and your application is reviewed by HR staff. And I think very frankly, often these are not subject matter experts. And so they're also looking for very specific keywords that are in the job posting to determine your eligibility. And I've applied to a few jobs in the past where I knew I was qualified, I knew I had the experience. And when I applied, I was told, hey, you don't meet the qualifications here. And I think the challenge was like, I really was not specific enough with the language that I used in that resume. So I think just really being hyper vigilant about length and lots of words is important. And so, yes, I kind of joke that this is the Netflix and chill section of applying to federal jobs. And that is because I recommend that you take a lot of time to do this and don't make it stressful. Try to do it over a period of time. And I think what really we should be looking for is that you actually write in an entire paragraph on every internship you've ever had, every job you've ever had. I would actually go more detailed than that and talk about every project that you've ever worked on, including school projects, and then actually every course you've ever taken. So under the education section, I actually went to the school websites of schools I had attended, and I copy and pasted information from the website of like the courses that I took. And then I just like pasted it into the application, like really talking about like throwing as many words in there as possible. And yeah, so other activities that you can include in the resume are volunteer activities, any awards you've won, special language skills, any contracting experience you have, throw all of that in there. And yeah, I recommend you do it with a bottle of wine, mostly because I think it can take a while and be kind of boring. And you might want to do it like over a couple of days, because to sit down and like throw all of that in there in like one sitting might just be like a lot. And so then the only other piece of information I have here is to add extra detail into the additional information section of the resume. So when you pull up USA Jobs, and again, I do actually recommend that maybe you look at that right now. So go to the build a resume function, and you can see that there's information on education. There's also information on the jobs you've been at. And then I just started like tossing random other stuff into the additional information section, because again, it's like a great place to put other words. And so, yeah, this is just a little screenshot of what it looks like. And I hope it still looks like this. And I feel like I had something else to say here, but I can't remember what it was. Sorry. So the other thing that I spoke about earlier and definitely want to reiterate is that in this additional information section, you should pull language from the job posting and like add it in there, because again, the goal is for computers to pick this up, and we want to make sure that you have the right words that computers will identify as being appropriate, and then we want to make sure that you have the right words when HR is doing their review. So so what I actually would also recommend right now is go find a job on USA Jobs that is something that you'd be interested, something you'd want to apply to, and look to see what the job posting talks about in terms of like the work activities. And so what I did was I basically like copy and pasted a lot of that into this additional information section and then edit it to describe my actual experience. So for instance, if it's a job that, so this is like a screenshot, I think, of my actual resume, but if the job says, you know, do you have supervisory experience and supervisory experience in public health doing research, for example, like I would like take that line and just like put it in there and say, I have supervisory experience, like overseeing people conducting research. And then I would like do a little additional like sentence on what that actually was. So like, yeah, like Connect for Health Colorado, we research, you know, health exchange policy, something like that. And so I would not lie, but I would recommend maybe editing a little bit to describe your actual experience, and then really try to speak to every item that they list there in the job posting. And so if you really, and I think this is where it can get tricky and where you might want to take a few days to like do this resume in full, because if you feel like, hey, maybe I don't really have experience in that area, just sit down and think about it. It doesn't have to be a perfect fit, but I would try to say that you've done everything in the job post. And, you know, school counts towards that. Undergrad counts, graduate school totally counts. Any internships you've had count, any like supervision of other interns, you know, things like that. I think that you probably have more experience than you realize, and I absolutely would make sure that that's known here in this additional information section. And I know I'm doing a lot of talking, so any questions, feel free to throw questions at me as I talk.
Emma, there are a few questions that came into the chat that I can read, but I wanted to ask a question, which was for resume writing, when the federal government posts things and asks if you've used specific federal government systems, how do you suggest that students approach that if they've never worked for the government before?
That is a great question. So if it's like, yes, a FedGov like system, I guess, speak about contracting experience, speak about research knowledge of the system, speak about any internships you've had or any analogous systems. So I'm not thinking of a great example, but for instance, there like, you know, like maybe a claims database at CMS that you don't have access as like a normal person. You could say, hey, like I have lots of experience working with things similar to, and then I would list the name of the system because again, they're looking for keywords. And then you could say, such as when I reviewed claims, looking at like this all pair claims database. That might, I hope that's what you're speaking to.
Yeah, so trying to focus more so, I guess, on the transferable skills that you have, even if it's in a different system.
Yes.
Okay. So I am happy to read out some of the questions that came through. The first one is going back to the page length for federal resume. Is there a suggested number of pages that folks should aim for?
You know, so this is a great question. Thank you, because it's reminding me of the other thing I wanted to say, which is please also feel free to attach your normal resume as an attachment. Because I think when you actually, we can talk more about this later, but when you actually get to the job interviewing section of like applying for a federal job, people are going to be like, what is this 10-page monster? Like, what have you actually done? And then it's helpful to be like, yeah, like there's a 1 or 2 pager that I've attached. So don't feel like you have to do this monster resume and that's the only thing you have. The other thing I wanted to point out from this comment is that at least at CMS, like cover letters, no one read. And so I would not recommend necessarily spending time on a cover letter. It definitely was not something they looked at CMS. I believe my understanding is I don't think they look at them like across HHS. And if you can save time not doing something, I would say don't do it unless you craft one that's like super general and you can attach to like every job. Or maybe like make special in a way that's like one or two sentences. So question about cover letter, but to answer your original question about length of the resume, I don't think there is a specific length you need to aim for. I would just try to do like a paragraph on like everything you've ever done, no big deal, which can be pretty lengthy. And I actually think I did hit up against the word limit at one point, but you have to write a lot to get there.
That's great advice. Okay, so the next question is under the work experience section, could you build out volunteer work experiences or maybe like a practicum course as a work experience?
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really great idea, especially if you have relevant work experience that's relevant to public health. But even if it's not super relevant to public health and you've learned like really great skills at that, like again, maybe just like general research or what else do we do? Supervising, contracting, anything that's volunteer, like just leading a team. I think that's really, really great. And you absolutely should list it. Although actually, and I might say this just because it is kind of specific to me, maybe stay away from like lots of information on political volunteer work. You could be like, I like worked with teams, but I might be like less political in a federal application.
That's a really good piece of advice. So someone else asked, how would you recommend formatting this? So I'm guessing this is talking about outside of the resume builder, but if you were to maybe upload your resume, is there a specific format?
So that's a great question too. I don't have great advice on this because I would say mine was like very messy. And I think that's probably okay. Again, like I like literally just did paragraphs. And then you can see in this additional information section, I was just like pulling stuff in and copying and pasting and like never deleting any of the information I put there. I mean, when I would definitely, again, recommend clicking through right now as we have this conversation, but you can see there's like an education section. So it's kind of clear what you put there. And then there's a job section and you pull stuff that's in your current resume. Definitely start with your 1 to 2 page resume that you have right now, toss all that in there and then just start piling stuff on top of that. I think that they'll be able to understand it, even though it becomes this like monster resume thing.
Yeah, I guess, and sort of following up on that, another student asked about, is there a format that the hiring managers prefer? So like using the resume builder versus another format, but I think what you said is like use the resume builder, but then you can upload a separate smaller document. Didn't know if you had any insight on what hiring managers actually see.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like, I'll just skip ahead a little bit to what happens. So, and I have been on this side once or twice, and now in my current role, I do a lot of hiring or some amounts of hiring. And so, right, goes to the computers, goes to HR people. They send lists of folks over to the people at the federal government who would actually be your manager. Usually, the first list is a bunch of veterans. And so then your hiring manager has to go through all the veterans, decide if any of them are qualified. If any of them are qualified, they're going to interview those people first. And we can talk more about that later. And then the second list is folks that aren't veterans, essentially. And so they have all the information in your application. They have your monster build a resume. They also have any attachments. So they will see these other resumes that you've pulled. They will see the information in like the job section. They'll see your education. My experience, very frankly, was that if somebody makes it all the way to a hiring manager who like actually has public health experience, they're extremely excited about that. Like you probably will be qualified and they'll probably be very excited to interview you. Again, we can talk a little bit more about this, but the way the point system works is that they give extra points to people with some special backgrounds. So veterans, folks like that, people with Peace Corps experience, things like that. And so it can be kind of tricky to get through the folks that are like, I've just done public health my whole life. And so I think, again, like if you can make it through, you're probably in good shape. But other things that I would recommend. So I did actually in my interview for CMS, somebody like had my like 10-page resume and was like, I see this project you did like 3 years ago. Tell me about it. And I was like, I like do not know what you're talking about. So just make sure that you actually remember all the things that you wrote about. I do recommend that, but have some extra copies of your regular resume with you when you're actually in the like a hiring interview. It will be really, people will really appreciate that. I think that people also had my like 1-pager that I had attached, but I mean, like a normal hiring manager, like to see it all on like 1 page. I hope that answered the question. I kind of went on some tangents.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful. So we have some other questions coming through. Why don't we pause and just let you continue with your presentation, Emma, and then
Okay.
maybe when we pick back up with questions, I can allow people to come off mute and ask them as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'd love to get through to like all the questions because I'm seeing some great ones come through. So I will minimize that for now. And then we'll have lots of time at the end. Yeah, great. So spoke more about keywords. And then, okay, so that's kind of the end of like building your federal resume. And so I think what we've learned is that it needs to be very, very lengthy. We need to have lots of words in. We're hoping to get picked up by computers. We're hoping that HR folks understand your experience. That's the goal of building a very comprehensive, lengthy, detailed resume. So then there's a second step, and the second step is called an occupational questionnaire. And the questions in this occupational questionnaire are essentially, they're real, like when I applied, they were really things like, do you know health policy? Explain on a scale. And the scale was like, I don't know anything about health policy, to like, I could write a textbook on health policy. So this is a part that I think actually trips up a lot of really smart, well-intentioned people, is that people like look at that 1 to 5 rubric and they're like, well, I probably couldn't write a textbook on health policy, so I'm going to say I'm like a 3. So this is where I just recommend that you are an expert in everything. Really, really, really strongly recommend this. If you want to talk more about this with me afterwards, let's definitely talk. I know that this makes people feel uncomfortable, but so to what I was speaking to earlier, the challenge with federal jobs is that essentially your application gets turned into like a number, and the number is supposed to show like how well qualified you are for a job. And so if you don't rank yourself as being extremely well qualified, your application will never go to the hiring manager. And so if somebody asks you in that questionnaire, could you write a textbook on health policy? There's like one correct answer if you want to make it through the computer system. And so, yes, I would recommend that you can write a textbook on health policy. Maybe it's not the best textbook. Maybe it's a textbook that would get better with a couple of years of job experience. But I wouldn't feel bad about like ranking yourself that highly. It's the only way to make it through. And again, hiring managers will be really excited to see you on the other end of that, because essentially, like if you don't do that, somebody else will. And that person might not be as qualified as you. So I think that this part can be hard for people because they feel bad about it. And that's why I wrote at the bottom, you're a good person. You're like an honest person, and we're just doing what we need to do to make it through the system. Any immediate questions on that? And I did just get a message to speak slower, so I'll try to speak slower. Sorry. Definitely a New Yorker here. All right, so that's the occupational questionnaire. And again, essentially, it's just a list of questions that talk about your experience. Nothing's usually super specific. Well, it will speak to what the job posting is asking for. All right, no questions. So let's keep going. So what happens next? So the job posting will close. You should get an email that says your application was received. And then what I really strongly recommend is that you wait basically like 4 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks. And if you don't hear anything else, contact the hiring officer. And so again, the hiring officer is going to be somebody in HR that is like in charge of managing that job posting. And so something that's actually super nice is that they are required to respond to everyone who writes to them. And I actually would write to them if you aren't hearing anything, because again, they're required to respond to you. The fact that you wrote to them, it's not information that will go to the actual hiring manager, which is the person in the agency that would be your supervisor. And they can give you information on what's going on with the application. So is it just like a backlog and they haven't gotten to it? Have they passed names along? Were you deemed not qualified? I absolutely would write to them. And so the other thing that I really, really highly recommend is that you write to the hiring, contact the hiring officer when you get a result that's not referral, and when you get a result that says you're not qualified. And so I would absolutely write to them and say, can you tell me why I was deemed not qualified? And they'll tell you. And it's usually something to do with detail that was not in your federal resume. They'll be like, this position asks for experiencing like processing claims, and you didn't say that you had that. And so that it's super helpful for future applications, because you can say, okay, like learn my lesson this time. I'm going to go add that back into my federal resume. So really, really highly recommend you lean on that tool. I know it definitely makes people a little bit uncomfortable to email somebody in like this black box that's the federal government and ask them, hey, like, why not me? Like, what happened? But it really is a super good tool. And actually, I had a student recently reach out to me and say that they didn't make it through, and they were really upset and they didn't know why. And I said, please email the hiring manager, like email the HR and find out why you didn't make it through. And what happened was that the person actually had not completed their occupational questionnaire, which is the survey that you have to do like after you submit your resume. And like that's absolutely a mandatory part of every application. And so I think it was a really good learning experience, because like basically we learned we have to do that. We can't skip that or we won't make it through. So that's a little bit more on what happens next. Let me just give like maybe a little bit more detail here. So yes, you'll get a notice saying, hey, you applied. Then you'll get a notice saying you were deemed qualified or not qualified. If you're not qualified, you're out, unfortunately. If you're qualified, you could be referred. And so then the next step is referred or not referred. Referred would mean that you scored high enough to actually have your resume go over to the person that could be your supervisor. Not referred means that you did not score high enough. And again, that's why we're talking about that occupational questionnaire and really ranking yourself very highly. And then, what else? Yes, again, like the challenges that you're going to be up against folks that have experience that gives them additional points. So if you're a veteran, like, oh my God, definitely list that you're a veteran, because you'll make it through much more easily than a lot of other people. All right, any other questions here?
Some questions that came through the chat, but I also gave folks the ability to unmute themselves. So if you want to come off mute and ask Emma, you're welcome to do
that. And I see some questions, so I will just start answering, but feel free to like interrupt me or put them into chat. So contact information for the hiring officer. Oh, that's a good question. It should be in the job posting. And so when you apply to something, you should see it. And if you have difficulty finding that, just email me and like, let's do it together, because it should not be hard. It should be there. And then, yes, it's on the job posting. Okay, perfect. Can you be qualified but not referred? Yes, absolutely. That happens a lot. And so again, like, yeah, you had a great resume. You showed that you had experience, but you were not referred, and you could have been not referred because there was a veteran, for instance, that ranked higher than you that they deemed qualified, or because, you didn't score yourself high enough on that occupational questionnaire. That happens like all the time. And so one of the other things, I think I have this on another slide, is please just don't get discouraged. You're going to have a lot of federal job rejections before you have success, and that's okay. Don't let it get you down. Just keep applying. And you'll also like the more experience you have with the process, the better you'll get at it, and the more likely you'll get a job that you really like. And so what else would I, and actually, so what month is it? It's November. I might recommend, hey, submit an application. Why not? It can't hurt. See how far you get. It'll give you experience working with the system. I know you're probably not going to start a job until the summer or maybe even like a couple of years from now, but I think that it really can't hurt to throw in some information into a federal resume and then just like understand the process, because you'll get all these emails that talk about how qualified you are. You'll get emails showing whether you were referred or not, and you'll be like, okay, I kind of like know what to expect now. That's a great question. So do rejections jeopardize future applications? Actually, totally not. Please do not be worried about that. The person who would be your supervisor is not aware of that at all. And so one other thing I would say is that like, yeah, I like love informational interviews, do informational interviews with everyone you possibly can that works where you want to work. Often like they're hiring, right? So they have a job posting and they're like, oh my God, please, I just want a public health person. And they like might even like, you might be talking to somebody who could be your boss who wants to hire you. And they're like, okay, we opened up this job posting, apply. We're like really hoping you make it through. I've seen that happen. And like the candidate that people wanted, like didn't make it through for whatever reason, like didn't have enough information in their resume, didn't have a good occupational questionnaire response. And so then they're like, okay, like Emma didn't make it through. We'll like repost and see if she makes it through next time. I've definitely seen that happen in the past. So yeah, don't feel bad about rejections. Like I don't think anybody, no one who's your boss would be aware of that. It doesn't reflect badly on you. When you get into the federal government, people will be like, oh my God, you made it through, like party. People are just like really excited that you're there. Okay, great question about job postings. So and one thing I was saying to folks before everybody joined was I'm actually really not sure what's going on with federal jobs right now because I'm like a few years out, and I feel like there were definitely hiring freezes under the Trump administration. Under Biden, I was expecting there to be lots of hiring. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm like aware of lots of hiring, although I'm assuming CDC is doing lots of hiring. I bet FDA is doing a bunch of hiring. I think that there definitely are jobs there. And so I can't necessarily speak to specific times of the year that there's lots of postings, although I did want to talk a little bit about the Pathways internship. But the thing that I really, really highly recommend, I apologize if this is on other slides, is that everyone start a job search that emails you on Wednesdays. And the reason I recommend Wednesday is because usually federal jobs are posted for basically like 2 weeks, but can also be a week and can be like 3 days. I would say like those are the 3 time periods that I see most frequently: 2 weeks, a week, or 3 days. And so if you have a result that's emailing you every Wednesday, you should capture everything. You should capture those applications that are open for 2 weeks. You should capture applications that are open like Monday to Friday, and you should capture applications that are open like Tuesday to Thursday. And so yes, please, please, please start a job posting results, a saved search, I think that's what they're called, that will email you on Wednesdays. And so like maybe even book some time for yourself on Wednesday night or like Thursday, sometime during the day, to go through all those and like apply to everything. And so once you've got this process figured out, it really shouldn't take you that long to apply to jobs, because again, you have a really lengthy resume already. You know how to fill out the occupational questionnaire. And you're pulling some specific terms from the job posting, but that's not super difficult. And what's the other thing? I'm forgetting something else. Oh, and you're not doing a cover letter. You don't have to do a cover letter. So you're not wasting a lot of time like writing a lot of specificity. Okay, I am seeing a lot of questions coming through. So I might just keep going. Sorry, guys. These are great questions and I want to answer all of them. So let's definitely keep up the Q&A. So yes, I think I talked about this. Don't let rejection get you down. Please, please, please. I know it feels really bad to be rejected. I hate being rejected, but it's just normal. Don't let it get you down. It's a really good learning experience and you can only get better. So don't feel too badly about that, and don't let it discourage you from being a federal employee, because we need you. We're really excited to have you, and like once you get in, you'll be great. And so yes, again, informational interviews, try to find people who actually work the jobs that you want to work at the federal government. They'll be very happy to do informational interviews. I actually went and did like a site visit before I even applied to anything at CMMI, and like sat down and did lunch with a bunch of people. Like everybody's super friendly. They also understand how challenging it is to make it through, because many of them have been through the system, and it's very tricky. They can give you tips that I don't have. Yeah, definitely make friends with federal employees. They're super nice. There's lots and lots and lots of them in Baltimore, lots of CMS employees in Baltimore. Go hang out in Hamden. You'll find some CMS employees. What else? Okay, so the next slides are on negotiation. I did want to just, I can't remember if I had this here. I did want to take a second to talk about pathways. So I believe the internship program is still called Pathways. That is the one program that I would say it is usually listed at certain times of the year. And those certain times are winter. So I feel like it's usually early in the new year. And then not remembering the other time, maybe like sometime in the summer or the fall. Definitely look for pathways internships, because it makes your life so much easier. You basically submit a resume, and like my understanding was that they accept like a lot of people. They maybe accept like almost everybody, and they're not like ranking you. You're not getting like the same scoring. The only trade-off is that you will come in at a lower GS level, which I think is a good transition to this negotiation conversation. And so, yeah, you'll come in at like a 7, which is pretty low, especially if you've worked before. The other thing that I would recommend you pull up right now is the GS scale. Go and pull up, Google GS levels and go and pull that up, and make sure you're looking at the Baltimore, DC area. If you're in Baltimore or DC, if you're in Denver, Colorado, go look up the Denver area one. They have scales for all across the country, and it's the pay salary. It's the pay scale, the money that you would be making. And so again, pathway is much easier to make it into. You could even save a search that like just looks for the word pathways. But trade-off is that you come in much lower. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about the GS levels now. So, okay, I have to give this like little shout out. Women, ask for more money. Like always ask, even if you're like, damn, this is a good salary, I'm like happy with this, just ask for $5,000 more dollars. Like just do it. Nobody will feel uncomfortable about that. When you're on the other side, you see candidates do it all the time. Make sure you're getting what you deserve. So absolutely recommend that. But then GS levels. So actually, let's do one more like little Q&A. How many folks here, raise your hand if you have 2 years or less of job experience. This will be, okay. Seeing some hands raised. Okay, that's super helpful. Okay, cool. So like a good number of people. Raise your hand if you have like 3 to 5 years of job experience. Okay. Cool. Like the one thumbs up. Raise your hand if you have maybe 5 to 10 years of job experience. So it's like a pretty evenly split group. Anybody have more than 10 years of experience right now? Definitely still some folks out there. Awesome. So, okay, so I'm gonna probably not gonna be perfect at this. I might need some help. So if I remember correctly, 7 is like coming out of college, and you should have your GS scale pulled up right now. Go take a look at that salary. Yeah, that's like what they're paying essentially college students. And then nines to, I would say like nines to 11s to 12s. That's probably the GS level that you're going to get if you have 2 years of work experience, 2 years or less, or like just a graduate degree. So I would be aiming for the 9 to 12 range. If you have, so this is the thing that's a little tricky. 13s tend to be people's promotional opportunities. And so once you're in the federal government, when you usually like come in as like part of a scale, and the scale will frequently be a 9, I'm going to mess this up, like a 9, 10, or maybe like a 9, 11, 12 scale. And so you get to 12, and then you have to actually like reapply for USA jobs to get a 13. And you will see 13 job postings listed on USA jobs. And the only thing that I say to people is like, those can be tricky because they're often people's promotions. So 13s are often people's promotions, and 14s are also like very tricky, usually somebody's pretty big deal promotion. So if you have, I might be like revising my statement a little. If you have somewhere between like up to 2 years of experience, probably aim for like those nines, but don't let that stop you. I would say like almost everybody should be applying for jobs that are like nines, tens. I can't remember if they have tens, nines, tens, like 11s and 12s. And so people that have around 5 years of experience definitely I would apply in that 9 to 12 range as well. I would also try to apply to 13s, but anybody who has a lot of experience, like more than 5 years, more than 10 years, apply to 13s, apply to 14s for sure. But I would also apply to basically like 12s, and you can see the salaries there. And so the reason again is because those 13s, those 14s, they can often be somebody's like promotion. And so even if you're like a great candidate, they might know who they want to hire for that. And so I just recommend like get into the federal government. That's the highest or like the most challenging piece of things. And then, so like, let me give you just a little bit more about salary. So there's the grade. I'm going to mess this up. I'm sorry. It's been like a little bit. Yeah, there's the grade, and then there is the step. And so you can see that like in the 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, there's this whole range by. All right, cool. And so if you've worked before, all you have to do is say to the hiring manager, like, hey, like I've had a job before. This was my salary, and they should match you. They should match you plus 10%. And so they're definitely, I had colleagues that came from private industry and they were making a lot outside of the federal government. And then when they came through, they got a match plus a certain amount. So you might still be at like a 12, but you might be at a really high step. And so the salary will be much better. And so if you get in, and you are a 12, you know, like you're in, people know who you are. Just take some time to like show, hey, I'm a great employee. And then you apply for that 13, you apply for that 14, and that will be a conversation that you have with your supervisor. And so the other thing that I hope you're seeing is that the feds like pay pretty well. I mean, maybe not as great as some consulting jobs, but I think it's like a really great salary to do important work. And I think that they pay well because they want you to stay and they want you to be happy, and they have good benefits, and it's all part of like a good work-life balance. You're not really supposed to be working over 40 hours a week much. I think that they're really great jobs that will let you have a life and like let you have a family, things that are really important. Oh, I see the note about the recording button. Any other, oh my gosh, I apologize because we're getting a lot of questions and I'm not keeping up with them. So, okay, good question. Yeah, if you're a PhD, I would recommend applying to a 12 or a 13er. It's hard to come in straight as a 14 unless that's a conversation that you're having with someone in the federal government. where they're like, we want you to be a supervisor. And so we're hiring, or we want you to be like a technical expert. And so we're going to hire you at a 14. I think that's less common. What's more common is that people come in as 12s and as 13s. And can't remember what else I was saying.
Emma,
Other questions?
can I
Yeah,
follow up on that? Aside from the PhD question, a few questions came in about does the federal government use an equivalency formula? So if you've been in school for a long period of time, will they consider that in place of experience? So if you were pursuing a PhD or even a master's degree, does that help you in the steps process?
Great question. So, like the rule I always learned, and I think I learned this before Hopkins, was that after college, it's all experience. So any job experience you have counts, but any time in a graduate program also counts. So if you've spent the last 5 years doing a PhD, which is awesome, you're like a much smarter person than me, you have 5 years of experience. I mean, even if you never worked a job after undergrad. And actually, the only other thing that this reminded me of, and I also think is very, very important, is and I know I've said this before, but don't only apply to one job, like apply to a lot of jobs and look at the education requirements and look at the experience requirements. Because what actually happened to me was I was applying for jobs at CMMI that wanted a certain level, a certain experience level. And I actually was also applying to federal Medicaid jobs. And the federal Medicaid jobs at the same GS level had a lower education requirement. I got both jobs. And so I was able to show the Medicaid job to the CMMI person and say, hey, pay me more. Like pretty much was what I did, because the Medicaid job, or sorry, I think I messed that up. They both asked for the same education level, which must have been like a master's, but the Medicaid job was a higher GS level. So absolutely, like look across agency. Don't feel weird about applying to stuff that you might not actually want, because if you get multiple jobs, you can be like, hey, this is my negotiating tool. I'm going to make more money because I like did this. So that's another recommendation. Medical degrees overseas, great question. I think it's the same as anywhere else. Every year in a degree program should count as a year of experience. Other questions here? I know I've missed a lot of questions. We can do more general. I'll try to end soon and then we can do a more general Q&A. Oh, okay, that's a great, so there's a question here about jobs not being open to the public. That's a really good question. So yes, you can see, like who's eligible to apply to a job. If you've never been in the federal government before, I do think you should be applying to jobs that are open to the public. Sometimes there are some other job postings that like have other types of things that you might qualify under. So do read carefully, because you might qualify. I'm not thinking of a good example right now, but again, like what you might frequently see is a position that's like a special assistant position or a GS-13, a GS-14, and the posting lists internal to agency. And those are going to be people's promotions. So I would not apply to those because you will be rejected, unfortunately. But yes, everything open to the public, that's a filter that you can do in a saved search. I absolutely would look for that. Certificate versus a master's, tricky if during a certificate program you were also working. I don't think you can like double count years of experience, but definitely if you like spent some time not working and got a certificate, that's experience. That's like 6 months of experience, a year or two of experience. Absolutely list that and list any certificates that you have in your resume. Oh, okay. So like questions about do I have a master's if I completed all my coursework? And like I don't technically have my master's because maybe I'm in one of these MSPH programs that require me to do a practicum in the next year. So this is again where I'm highly, highly encouraging you to say you have a master's. Say you have a master's even like so folks looking to be hired in the summer, start applying. I would start applying now. I think that I ended up, I think getting jobs that I applied for in February and started in June. So we definitely have a few months till February. And oh my gosh, please do not stress about this during finals. Get your finals done, take some time to relax, like have a fun winter break. But during winter break, that's when I would start thinking about like, okay, I probably should like start submitting some applications or like at least getting that federal resume done. But like, yeah, so in those applications that I was applying to in February, I was like, yep, I have a master's. And then by the time you actually get to talk to somebody who would be your supervisor, you can explain the situation to them. And again, like highly recommend that you just say like completed coursework, or like I felt like a difference between myself and some of the people who were my classmates who ended up coming in as interns and not like federal employees was that they like led with, I need an internship. Do not lead with that. Lead with like, I'm a Hopkins student or like I'm a Hopkins graduate. I've completed all my coursework. I'm like an expert in health policy. I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I think that you can make the situation seem a little bit like less of I'm a student who's working a practicum and more of like I'm a qualified applicant who has graduate coursework in public health and now I'm looking for a job for the next couple of years. If you lead with that attitude, you should get jobs. And maybe talk afterwards to me about how you list that in your federal resume, because again, many of these jobs require graduate degrees. If you're not done, that can be tricky. So there might be some ways that you might want to list that on your resume just to make it through again. And then you can explain things to your supervisor, and they usually don't care very much. So good question about pathways. So there's a question about pathways. What's the advantages for applying for a full-time job? So big advantage, like you're going to know people that you're working with. Like you have a bunch of colleagues, you've been working with them for 3 months, and they want to place you. Like they want you to be converted to a full-time person. And so you can work with your supervisor to make that happen. And that can be definitely, like a challenging process because you might have to apply through USA Jobs again, but like people will be advocating really hard for you because they want you to stay. And I think I never saw a pathway student who wanted a federal job, like not get a federal job. I think the worst case scenario was that they didn't end up in the same department that they were hired as an intern into. But maybe that's okay because maybe you want to try something different out. And then, oh my gosh, all these facts I have that I'm just like throwing at you. The other thing I would say is like sometimes it's the best scenario is just getting in. Just get in. You might not be working a job that's like your favorite ever thing, but really just do it for 1 year. And then once you're in, you have like plenty of time to talk to people at the agency to learn more about like the work that they do, where you think might be like the perfect fit for you, somewhere you might want to work for a long time. And then you can start like applying to stuff. Once you hit 1 year, you're out of your probationary period. And you can it's just much more easy to move around once you're actually in, and like just getting in can be a good way to figure out where you really want to go. Yeah, so unfortunately, there are like other ways to get points that are not a veteran. I don't have them all. I don't have like most of them memorized. I think Peace Corps is definitely one. If you've done Peace Corps, like, oh my God, please list that. You cannot get points in other ways that are not like those things like Peace Corps, like being a veteran. It's just about ranking yourself really highly on that occupational questionnaire and like crossing your fingers. All right, let me see what's on the next slide. Actually, okay, so just like a little bit more practical information. Once you get hired, so yay, you've been hired. You're gonna have to be fingerprinted. You're going to have to go through a background check. It's lengthy and kind of scary. So like somebody I used to work for basically got like a letter saying, does Emma like hang out with terrorists? And she was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, are you working for FBI? Like, nope, that's just the questions that they ask to get the lowest level security clearance. So you're going to end up with a really low level security clearance. In other types of jobs, you might have a very high level. A high level security clearance job is a very lengthy process, like a secret clearance, and like we're talking years sometimes. So, and if you want a job like that, oh my gosh, go for it. That sounds super cool. You might need to get a different job that's not in the federal government while you wait for that clearance to come through. I probably have more to say about this. If you have specific questions, like especially if you have a lot of foreign family that you visit frequently, your maybe email me and we can talk a little bit about what that would look like. You have to be a US citizen. If you aren't a US citizen, you're not going to be eligible, unfortunately. And if you're not a US citizen, let's talk, because there are other ways that you can basically also work for the federal government, but I won't speak in too much detail about them right now. The one other thing I wanted to say is there's going to be a question about like marijuana in the great state of Colorado. You know, we have some different laws. Please don't say that you've smoked in the past or whatever, because you'll get disqualified. I mean, like, and you don't want to fail at the background check stage. Like that would be very sad. So I'm probably telling you to like break a law, but don't do that to yourself. It would be really disappointing. That's the only thing I'll say about that. Any questions here? I think. All right, so I'll do, oh my gosh, we're like, wow, I have talked for a full hour. So I'll just do like a few more tips. Yes, I've said this before, apply, just start applying, check it out, it can't hurt. Another reason it might be great to just submit some applications is to see what the full length of the process looks like. CMS, I think, is like actually quite good. I mean, they're turning things around in 1 to 2 months. I applied to a VA job and like they got back to me in a year. So I feel like it definitely varies by institution or like by agency. And it might be good to like put your toe in the water and see what that's like at CDC, at FDA, at anywhere else that you're interested in going. And then, yes, make internal contacts at the agency and like keep them updated, like email them and be like, this is how it's going. And then also feel free to email me, like, especially if you're feeling really stressed out about it and you're just like, I applied to 5 jobs, like I got rejected from 2. I like was told I was qualified for 2, but then I didn't get referred. And like, there's 1 more that I'm waiting on. Like, what should I do? Just feel free to like email me. I'm happy to like give you some moral support, talk to you about what you could be doing differently. And people have done that. And then some of them get jobs, which is great. And then okay, the only other thing I will say, I am so sorry because we're at time, is that there are often these direct hire opportunities. So I'm pretty sure that CDC was doing this, especially at the height of like lockdowns and things like that. Like direct hire means a lot of these rules are waived. They're trying to get people in as quickly as possible. They pretty much just look at like regular resumes. If you ever see something called direct hire, oh my God, apply to that immediately, because it's like a super easy way to get in compared to the other process. So, okay, I'm sorry, we're at like 9, I'm not sure what time it is on the East Coast, 9:58 plus 2 hours. What other questions can I answer quickly before we run out of time? And I'm also happy to stay on. I know there's probably other stuff going on.
So Emma, a couple folks asked, you mentioned being a resource. Would you be willing to share your email address in the chat with folks?
Yes, I will share. I'm going to share. So I just put in my Connect for Health Colorado email. Again, work at a state-based exchange. So feel free to email me if you want to talk about anything at CMS, Medicare, Medicaid, cost containment. That was what I did at CMS. And now I work on state-based exchanges. So that's healthcare.gov, Connect for Health Colorado. Happy to talk about that stuff too. And tell your friends it's open enrollment. So if they don't have health insurance, they should apply. Other questions? And I can stay on for a little bit. I know that there are like many other great things happening today, but if you want to talk, I'm like, I'll stick around.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you, Emma, for taking the time. This is a super informative presentation. For me, I think for many of the students here today too, so hopefully we'll have some good applications. And yeah, we can stick around for a couple minutes. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you. I see some direct messages in chat, so I might just stay on and answer them if people want to stick around. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Everybody is so kind. um, okay, non-citizen applications, email me. I'm sorry, I should have said that much earlier. Yes, it's you. I'm pretty sure you like can't be a federal employee if you're not a citizen, but there are many other programs that I had friends that were not citizens, became citizens. They were not citizens, they were like in these special programs. So I was like working with them. They were my coworkers. Then they became citizens and they got hired by the feds. So all you have to do is become a citizen, no big deal. Yes, but please email me. Any other questions? There's still a lot of people on. If you have something else, we've probably missed it, so maybe re-enter your question. Technical masters versus
I had a
management.
question.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I had a question about remote work. Is that something that people are still going to be able to negotiate beyond COVID?
That is a great question. So I think the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is maybe. So something that I'm hearing that's very surprising to me is that folks are starting to go back, like a lot of federal employees are starting to go back in mid-January. Whether or not that actually happens, I'm not like 100% confident it will actually happen. So the other thing though is like at this point, everybody's been, I mean, like I'm still at my job, we're remote through like at least the spring, if not longer. People have been remote for a very long time. The federal government also has a way to be fully remote, and that existed long before the pandemic. And then the other thing I would say is that it was very common, like vast majority of people are already remote for 2 to 3 days of the week. The other thing that I would, but like, let's say you see a job in Baltimore that you want, but you live in like Denver, Colorado. I would say like at this point in time, don't let that stop you from applying. Like apply to stuff that you want. Thank you for your support, Hopkins folks that are hopping off. I appreciate it. Yes, apply to those jobs though. Like apply to them. And then like when you actually start speaking to a hiring manager, you can be like, yeah, I live in Denver, and then see, like, let's see what they do. I would be very disappointed if folks were not accommodating of jobs that can be done fully remotely. And I think the way of the future at the feds is going to be a lot of more people are remote. So don't let that stop you. But yeah, like if you like live in the Baltimore, DC area, or that's just like, or like, let's say you live in Denver and you get a Denver job, the most you're ever really going to be in the office is like 2 to 3 days a week. So I think the larger challenge is if you like live in San Francisco and you want a job in DC.
And I'll just kind of add to that too. Knowing people that are working in the federal government, a lot of them are continuing to do remote work, but they're beginning to have the discussions of people coming back and kind of being there. So I think for a lot of places, it's going to be a case by case. But I think at the same time, there's, like you said before, there's always going to be those options to do a couple of days in, a couple of days out. And it's probably something to be worked out during the time of hiring.
Thank you. If you have other questions, put them in the chat. Feel free to just say them. I'm seeing a question about whether like you're more likely to get a job with a technical master's or a management master's. I think just make the case for yourself. I mean, like, I don't think either are bad. You have a master's degree and it's years of experience. So as long as you can just say like, you know, I have experience with this management thing that I learned about in school, and then I applied in an internship, and that makes me qualified for like this thing in the job posting. I think that's great. Other questions? It's been so nice to talk to all of you today. Wave hi to Baltimore for me. I miss it.
Yeah, so I want to say thank you, Emma, for giving a great talk again. Everything I think you always share is very kind of practical and, and makes a lot of sense. So again, we will have a recording that's available if anybody missed anything or wants to hear anything. If you have questions, for Emma, maybe is it like best to connect with you on LinkedIn or what would you prefer?
LinkedIn is fine. Definitely feel free to email me. I can put my email. I'll put my email again. The other thing I forgot to say is like, if you're interested in Colorado jobs, like also email me about that. Or if you just want to talk generally about what it's like to work in a state, it is pretty different than being on the East Coast.
Right, exactly. And to know too that there are public health jobs,
Yeah.
outside of the Baltimore, DC area. So I think that's another, interesting thing to always know about.
Even in my cow town.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming here today. It looks like there's one more question. Who should I contact about foreign medical degree equivalency? It's a good question.
I think it's just same like years of experience.
Yeah.
Sorry, Paul.
No, it's fine. Again, too, if anybody has questions for our office, we continue to have the virtual drop-in hours that you can come to. All three of us are available. Or if you need to schedule something with us individually to talk, please email any one of us to have a talk about anything. And again, our next session will be later this afternoon. I believe it's scheduled for 3 p.m. It's a talk with Maria about her work that she does within USAID as a contractor. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. And again, thank you, Emma, for a wonderful presentation. We appreciate you always helping out with us.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.